I think one of the great lessons of disruption is the classic concept is disrupt yourself, of course, but then you have to say like, what does that even mean? It's sort of this pithy phrase that doesn't amount to a lot of substance. Usually, the only way out of being disrupted is finding something very attractive that you can do that is not sort of taking revenue from your core business, but instead letting you go on offense. It's very hard to play defense and survive that. I think very few companies in history have sort of won with defense. I think you basically have to find how to go on offense. For us, that means sort of focusing much more of our energy not on kind of like protecting anything, but instead just delivering a new set of capabilities for customers that really transform what you can do with your data inside of our platform.
From Foundation Capital, this is B2B as CEO, a podcast about the startup journey, about going from idea to IPO, and growing from a founder into a CEO. On each episode, I speak with notable CEOs and founders and get their stories about what it took to build a company of scale and become a leader in the enterprise. I'm Ashu Garg, a general partner at Foundation Capital. Today, I'm joined by Aaron Levie, the co-founder and CEO of Box. Aaron launched Box from his college dorm room back in 2005. Since then, he's grown it into a public company with over $1 billion in annual revenue. This is Aaron's second time on B2B as CEO, and he speaks candidly about his founder journey. We discuss how Box rode the cloud computing wave and their current work to integrate generative AI. Our conversation goes far beyond Box, though. From his position at Box, Aaron has gained a unique perspective on what the latest advances in AI mean for founders. We explore the AI applications that have Aaron the most excited, the areas where he believes startups have an edge over incumbents, and the AI opportunities founders might be overlooking. It was a really fun conversation that I think you'll enjoy. Here's Aaron. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today on B2B as CEO.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, good to be here.
Very, very privileged to have you for the second time. So I'm going to build off some of the conversations we had a few years ago. But again, thank you for doing this the second time. Why don't we start with a little bit of the Box story, just to sort of orient the audience?
Yeah, so we started the company in 2005 and built on a pretty simple idea. At the time, the cost of storage and compute was going down. The internet was getting faster. People were working from multiple devices. So our theory was, in the future, you should be able to just load up any computer, anywhere, any browser, any mobile device, and get access to all of your data. And that was the original sort of, theory of the company, really kind of trying to disrupt the traditional approach to managing your data and your content in the cloud. And we started it as a consumer company. And then we eventually decided that the business model of going after consumers was going to be pretty tough compared to competing with, when competing with Microsoft and Google and Facebook, et cetera. And so we decided that we'd go after the enterprise market where we felt like we could be more differentiated. We could, command more value for our innovation efforts and really be the platform that helps companies manage and secure and govern their most important content.
And when did you make that pivot to enterprise?
It was probably around kind of 2007, 2008 timeframe. So
relatively early still.
Yeah. We were only like 2 to 3 years into the company when we decided, okay, I don't think the consumer thing is just not going to work. It's going to be too competitive, and we really have to go after a market that we can be much more differentiated.
So once you made that pivot, you're now going down a very different journey. What was the process of getting your first handful of enterprise customers? And again, I know it's a long time ago, so some of these memories, are in the far distant past.
No, they're drilled into my brain. So I would say that we had a couple of things. So one, we were fortunate. We had some early employees that I think had the insight that there was this big opportunity in the enterprise space. A couple of my co-founders were very passionate about this. We had an early employee that had worked at Sun Microsystems as an intern. He had this theory that the enterprise market was going to be a lot more compelling for us. One of our early VCs, Josh Stein. Josh is an enterprise guy, and he saw that we had so many of these end users that were bringing us into the workplace that there might be actually a better business model if we could actually roll all those end users up and sell them an enterprise license. A few of these stars aligned, and we eventually got conviction that okay, we should pivot the company. And so to get once we decided to go pivot the company, we had to go then figure out who we should sell to. So we interviewed a bunch of customers. We figured out what features they would need that would let us go and upsell them and command more value. We worked hand in hand with them to define some of the core feature requirements. And those were the early days of going and selling in the enterprise. But it mostly was just great sales execution by the sales team. Very strong kind of early product managers in the company that were helping us design the capabilities that our customers needed. It was about listening to customers on what would they spend money on. Not always building exactly what they wanted, but at least trying to ultimately solve the kind of the ultimate job to be done in kind of Clay Christensen terms.
And was there a clear aha moment, some point when you felt like, aha, Box has found product market fit?
We didn't really even think about it as product market fit per se. I mean, it was just that it was working, and people were spending money on it, and that was basically at a point where somebody who literally was using us for free just maybe months ago was then sending us a check for a couple $1,000s. And so that was like blowing our mind because we were like we just offered you this free thing, but for some reason we're now adding enough value on top of the free thing that you're willing to spend thousands of dollars on this service.
And then you had to scale it. So that meant hiring more salespeople. I'm sure you got an avalanche of feature requests. As you said a minute ago, you can't build everything they want. So talk to us a little bit about that journey going from maybe a few tens, a few hundreds of customers to the first 1,000 customers.
Just honestly building a flywheel of you bring on more sales reps, those sales reps chase down more deals. As they chase down more deals, they want more leads. You get more leads. As they get more leads, you hire more sales reps, and that becomes one flywheel. So you kind of have this like go to market flywheel emerging. And then in that go to market flywheel, then you also have a product and kind of development flywheel, which is as you have more sales reps and they're talking to more customers, you have more features that you need, and then you've got that engine. So you're kind of juggling, two interdependent flywheels within go to market of demand gen and sales, and then another connected flywheel of kind of what you're building and how you're serving your customers. And we were just kind of spinning those things in as coordinated of a fashion as we could imagine doing.
And that coordination is very important because if you have more demand, if you're generating a lot of demand through demand gen, you don't have a sales team, that's bad. You're leaving money on the table. But on the other hand, if you have salespeople and you don't have enough demand gen, that's even worse because salespeople will leave.
The main lesson that I would ever take away from this entire period, call it like 08, 09, 010, 2011, like that 2 or 3 or 4 year period was simply really just nailing the tailwinds that we were riding and trying to perfect that art of we have to be riding mega tailwinds in the market, or we simply will not be able to grow fast enough to go and disrupt this category. And so back then, the tailwinds were tablets and iPads, iPhones, general cloud computing, consumerization of IT, and democratization of software. And so we were always just trying to make sure that we were riding these mega tailwinds that eventually would bring our software into an enterprise somewhere, in the world. Just make sure that your software is riding some big tailwind. I can't point to an example in the past 2 decades, of a B2B company that got really big if it wasn't that there's some underlying architecture or market shift that was happening in your favor. And then certainly if you're going against the tailwind, you're just dead like that. Then you're just going to get crushed.
You have to at some point make that transition from push to pull in a sense. You've got to have demand pulling you, and and in your market there were multiple sort of ways to zig and zag through the market. As you know, the device proliferation, the consumerization of IT, the 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 shift from CIOs making all the decisions to departmental decisions, but really picking which one and how do you navigate this and what does that mean for your product roadmap and your positioning and packaging. Uh, in hindsight, I'm sure it all worked out, but in the moment, it must have been lots of stress and lots of chaos.
Definitely lots of chaos. A lot of it was like resource allocation decisions of what platforms do you bet on, what features do you develop, in what sequence do you develop them, what is going to maximize your total addressable market that you can go after. Don't How do you not get distracted by maybe temporary, big wins, but that would totally create a detour for your product, and your energy. And so a lot of it honestly was just about hyper focus. Don't get distracted by anything that's in the noise. Keep doubling down, putting more fuel on the fire. In our case, that led to some very expensive financially decisions that ultimately paid off. But they were kind of uh, very expensive in the moment, and you are sort of, to some extent, you're making a pretty significant bet that you're right, because otherwise you're going to burn a lot of cash, and it could have led to layoffs and lots of stuff that didn't happen because the bet was correct, but it could have ended very poorly if we were not correct.
This whole enterprise journey for you is, at this point, 15 plus years, and you've navigated a bunch of transitions, clearly made dozens of right decisions, but also when you look back, there are probably things you would have done differently. So, would you mind picking one or two to start?
This will come almost directly in contrast to what I just said. But I have gotten religion on cash flow, and just business model kind of health. And my general advice to founders is kind of the opposite of what we did, which is, do spend a decent amount of time trying to figure out, can you be cash flow positive earlier than you think? What is just the highest impact things you need to invest in so your dollars go to work, as much as possible. Like lots of very small tactical things they compound over time. They compound. So, if you get your billings strategy right, and your payment term strategy right, and your cash collection strategy right, and your gross margin, sort of focus right, all of those, you make 20 decisions in that whole space, and it could be the difference between 10, 20, 30% of dilution, and the amount of capital you have to raise, the amount of capital that you burn, to basically probably the same exact outcome as a company in terms of shareholder value, that's generated. And so I think going back, I probably would have been incrementally more focused on that. We almost never built a capability that backed us into a corner architecturally. Big difference in terms of how you think about things, which is, it's fine to hack together a solution if it's sufficiently abstracted from what the customer is ever going to get stuck on, and then you can spend all day long in the future, kind of replacing that. That's fine. That's just an expediency question. But we never got to a situation where we said we're going to ship a piece of software that once the customer deploys, we're like stuck with that particular pattern forever. That takes us all the way to today, which is like in AI as a great example. AI is this space which is moving so fast that you really need to nail your points of abstraction, or else you will be instantly stuck on some architecture design that forces you down a corner, that is not going to then garner all of the benefits that are happening on a regular basis in AI. So like we just learned that lesson early, and whether that was how we designed our mobile software, how we designed our APIs, how we thought about integrating with other software, it was really trying to be thoughtful about what's the long-term architecture, how do we make sure that we're set up for not ever being backed into a corner on anything that we're doing.
And that makes a ton of sense. And I think that distinction between tech debt and architectural choices, in fact, that you make is a really important one.
Yeah, you definitely can't be afraid of tech debt, or you won't ship anything. But you should be afraid of architecture that backs you into a corner.
Any other observations when you look back in terms of lessons learned that you'd like to share with founders?
If I were to simplify the job for any founder, it's build an amazing product that is riding tailwinds, establish a strong culture, and then honestly do everything you can to grow as quickly as possible.
Aaron, I'm going to switch gears in a minute to talking about the future, and especially with the launch of ChatGPT. It's been quite a remarkable time. So I just like to open the floor, maybe by giving you a chance to sort of share some initial thoughts, and we can go from there.
I'm much more passionate about sort of this agent kind of approach that we're entering, which is obviously the ultimate promise of AI in the first place. And the idea is obviously, can I go and take something that a human does and have an agent go and complete more than just a single task or more than just facilitating kind of question and answer of data. And I think that's going to be that is the part that then kind of creates a real disruption opportunity for startups, because if all that AI is making current software a little bit more intelligent, then it's not particularly disruptive. All the incumbents will just incorporate that technology into their platforms. What's disruptive is then when you have a new type of business model or a new form of software that is just so different from what an incumbent can do, that they either can't prioritize it, they can't pivot enough, they can't sort of go to their customers with such a different offering. And I'm starting to now see those types of categories of software emerge, which is super exciting. And that's ultimately, where most value gets created in one of these platform shifts.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what's so cool about what you're starting to see with agents, and it's still early days, is it's not additive to incredible workflows. It in many cases just completely replaces not just one part of the UX, an entire workflow or big chunks of a workflow. And so it reimagines the jobs. Uh, and that's hard actually for incumbents to sort of uh, get on board with, because they have thousands of existing customers who actually like the workflow they bought, and they're not all ready to move to something new at the same time. I mean, they all will eventually, but that's the innovator's dilemma, which is my current customers actually like what I sell them today, but there's this 5% of customers that want something radically new.
Yeah, 100%. And then in the classic innovator's dilemma sense, that new thing is supposed to look a little bit like, oh well, my most important customers, can't possibly use this. It's too cheap. It doesn't work quite well. And that's sort of classically where an incumbent, then disregards a new technology, isn't paying attention to it until it's too late. And what's interesting is actually a lot of these categories won't actually be software companies that sort of face the innovator's dilemma. It'll be in many cases actually non-software companies.
People in the physical world, yeah, services companies, business process outsourcers, a whole range of companies, yeah.
Right, which is has a whole other set of implications on sort of where labor goes, which I actually remain very optimistic about. But it does mean that we're going to see a different type of competitive dynamic. And what's interesting is that we sort of saw this play out in like mobile, for instance, where you had consumer companies that for the first time, that were largely protected, by hard assets of some form, start to get either disrupted or at least kind of there was new value being created. So, Airbnb in hospitality, Uber in transportation, Netflix in sort of movie studios and a cable. One interesting thing is actually if you look at the incumbents that many of those companies went after, many of them are still actually doing quite well. Either they responded well or they facilitated some other value proposition in that ecosystem. So I think you can actually interestingly be bullish on sort of on both. And so it is not going to be a zero sum game. And I think the biggest reason why it's not a zero sum game is that because if you really step back and you say, okay, how many companies on the planet can afford a well managed, highly industrialized outbound sales team, just to make up an example. And let's say 100,000 companies can afford to do that, or 50,000. I mean, whatever the right number is. Can a 3-person startup in name a country be able to do that? Probably not. So for the first time, if I have AI labor, uh, that all of a sudden gives me access to a different form of resource for the first time ever as a small business or a startup just coming out from nowhere. So I didn't replace a single dollar from the economy of taking that away from any existing incumbent.
You added a whole new class of players that could do things that could never have been done before.
Totally. And that's not in the GDP right now. Nobody's measuring that. It just doesn't exist.
I was just going to probe you on the mobile side. One of the things that's so interesting about mobile was it completely reimagined the consumer experience. So a lot of what eventually ended up being big companies in mobile were very consumer centric. There will be a lot of that in with AI as well, but AI's impact on B2B is even larger in a way that mobile never. To me, on the B2B side, it really reminds me of the internet, when on-prem software suddenly had to compete with something that was browser based, and that changed the entire experience of the enterprise. And this change feels even more dramatic.
I think about my personal life, and I think an AI, maybe person that I can chat with for health stuff is great. I think a little bit of like, okay, I need to plan my kid's birthday party. That's super cool. But like, we don't have so many sort of repeat activities in our personal lives where like throwing automation at that is like going to transform our personal lives. In business, there could be like an infinite amount of automation that is possible.
It's going to transform business to business interactions across every dimension that we can imagine.
I think one of the great lessons of disruption is the classic concept is disrupt yourself, of course, but then you have to say like, what does that even mean? Because it's sort of this pithy phrase that doesn't amount to a lot of substance. Usually, the only way out of being disrupted is finding something very attractive that you can do that is not sort of taking revenue from your core business, but instead letting you go on offense. It's very hard to play defense and survive that. I think very few companies in history have sort of won with defense. I think you basically have to find how to go on offense. For us, that means sort of focusing much more of our energy not on kind of like protecting anything, but instead just delivering a new set of capabilities for customers that really transform what you can do with your data inside of our platform. Everybody lives on a continuum of how disruptive AI is versus how much you can use it to be disruptive. Fortunately, we kind of land in the latter category because AI thrives on unstructured data, and we have a lot of unstructured data. And so AI is sort of like very clearly the type of thing that can make our platform more valuable to a customer, as long as we're the first to incorporate it and make sure that we're plugging these solutions in. Our strategy is build an abstraction layer from content in box to AI models with a bunch of logic in that abstraction layer, and that logic is essentially what would a human do to a document or to a video or to a set of videos or to a set of documents that now AI can be the brain for, and what are the tools that human would leverage, and how could you kind of have that all be orchestrated, and then how do you package that up for customers? And so for us, that's things like read a contract and automate this contract workflow, read an invoice and automate this invoice workflow, read or look at an image and label it and then automatically categorize it for a digital asset process. So that's sort of what we're bringing to our platform, and we just have to make sure that it's sort of priced effectively, that we can easily scale it for all of our customers, but that's basically the strategy that we're driving.
That's very cool. So it sounds like there's 100 startups that are going after these individual opportunities, all of which will eventually, from your perspective, become features in box, because the content is stored in box.
100%. And everybody should just assume that like we are like going to be on top of our game, building these capabilities. And yet, I think there's actually going to be plenty of market opportunity for everybody, because we're not going to do this for non-box data stores, as an example. Our sort of value proposition to customers is when you have content in box, we're going to make it extremely powerful. But that means that's a trade-off we've made to get really, really good at something that leaves open opportunities for other startups to emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. For other data sets in our data stores, absolutely. Uh, I want to come back to your comment on agents. Today, people are thinking about building what I call complex AI systems agents that pass on data or output to other agents, and you can build relatively complex workflows today. So I'd love to get your perspective on agents. If there are one or two companies or ideas that you've seen that you're really excited about as examples.
It feels like there was like a memo that got sent out to everybody on the internet, and basically that memo was sort of, hey guys, we're going to move from chatbots and chat interactions to this agent paradigm. And in this agent paradigm, it's going to be, what does a human do in a particular business process, and how do you sort of make software be able to do that thing. And in every effectively vertical or line of business or role in the economy, let's create an agent that can do some percentage of that work. And we're now at a point where we're seeing some great kind of patterns emerge of how you create those agents. I've seen now a few dozen startups that have taken some of the job families and tried to automate them. But we're literally like at the starting gun of probably a 5 to 10 year journey of automation. Only again having the pattern in just the past couple of months that I think we've seen work.
Is there one example that you looked at and say, wow, this really blew me away?
It's hard to predict which ones of these are going to work at this stage. It's kind of like guessing mobile companies in like '07. But what is 100% clear is that let's just pretend that there's like GPT-7 that's out there, and GPT-7, let's just say, costs the same as GPT 3.5 right now because of Jensen's law and everything gets cheaper or whatever. It's very easy to see how that would then be a breakthrough in just business operations, because all of a sudden you have this sort of cockpit, which is just like, okay, I want to deploy more sales capacity, boom, more sales capacity deployed. I want to go and test my software at every single edge case times 10 and do load balancing testing and security testing. That's just compute that I deployed that problem.
Yeah, you take fixed costs and variabilize them for one. Uh, Secondly, you go from having 6 9 months ramp up time to you know in an instant. So completely different mindset. But the thing, I want to come back to your job family point, because one of the things I tell founders is you can literally take any job for which there's a million people in the US doing it. White collar job. I mean, I think blue collar jobs with robots, but that's a different category. Take any white collar job with a million people, and you'll find that the vast majority of them have a class of activities that are very repetitive. People do them again and again and again, but they're not robotic, they're repetitive. And the two things are different. There's unstructured data, there's lots of edge cases, and you couldn't automate them pre-Gen AI, but with Gen AI, you can now take those tasks and for some jobs it's a co-pilot, for some jobs it's an autopilot. And again, these words, what is a co-pilot versus autopilot, will change over the next few years. But you could imagine that every one of these white collar workers has something that they use and that increasingly automates tasks. And at some point, it's push button, and that point maybe 3 years or 10 years, depending on the job. But there isn't a single job, I think, that will not be impacted.
Let's just say if I can make my sales team 20 or 30% more productive, I'm going to immediately hire more sales reps. If I can make an engineer 20 or 30 or 50% more productive, we're going to hire more engineers. So I think this is generally goodness for basically everybody. It might mean that certain roles have to change, exactly how that role is defined or what it's doing in the future to be successful. But I think this is going to be a boon for both businesses and workers.
It should take out so much of the tediousness that everyone does. I feel like we all walk around with, these task lists of all these random little things we have to do. And for the vast majority of people, that's the vast majority of their day. And you can automate that and have people focus on fewer things and go deeper.
Go deeper and do the things that honestly are value creating in the first place. There's just not that much value being created if I have to spend my time working through IT systems to find information, or pinging 2 to 3 colleagues to get a particular answer to a question that a computer already knows the answer to. I just don't know how to ask it in the right way. Like if I can get back all that time, all of that energy, and go apply it into strategy or working with customers or creating a new innovation, that's only better both for the company that I work at, but also then the economy in general.
Pushing on this a little bit, given that perspective, and which so far has been true for every technology that mankind has encountered. I mean, it's not like we're dealing with the first wave of technology. Mobile expanded the pie, internet expanded the pie. I mean, you can go back all the way to cars. Pick your favorite technology. How do you reconcile the history and the opportunity with the amount of fear mongering?
There's two things where the fears I think are appropriate, and then there's one which is just us not learning lessons from history. Basically, people land on one side of the coin or the other, which is like, will an AI be able to basically be like, I've leapt from one system to another, and I'm self-replicating, and I find a way to provision my own GPU capacity or compel humans to do it, or not. And like that becomes like, okay, how severe of the risk do you think there is? I land in this sort of not as worried camp, but I'm glad people are worrying about. That's great. And then there's very like practical issues, which are those in the category of any new technology that just needs to figure out what's the precedent on certain topics like copyright and IP protection. Like can an AI system train on anything in the public domain, or did we not really anticipate some of the public domain laws for AI models, and we need to like really rethink what does copyright look like, and I'm sympathetic to both parts of the argument, which is like, well, a human can listen to every piece of music and then go and create their own. But also, we again didn't like invent these laws in an era where we thought that a computer could do that, times a million people. That's a really interesting difference, and I certainly can't. I can't intellectually, argue that hey, I think like our rights for guns were built in an era of like muskets, and then also at the same time not apply that to AI. I think it's a very reasonable thing to be debating. The part that I'm not as into is, to the job point, and I think that I think our own industry and even our adjacent friends in like Wall Street or whatnot don't do us any favors, because you'll have like a Goldman Sachs report that says, hey, of 300 million jobs or something, we think 100 million of them could be replaced by AI. Or I'm being hyperbolic. I don't know what the actual report said, but it's like, okay, like, that's not gonna like create any friends in this new AI wave. And it's also just like empirically been wrong in every other point in history.
I think that's a good summary. So I think regulation around sort of AI going rogue, modulo sort of, being appropriate about sort of how much risk that really is and in what time frame. I think that makes sense. I think it's something we should all be sensitive to. I think the whole copyright issue, as you rightly said, I mean, both sides have a valid argument, and someone who's more technical, more knowledgeable about that subject has to sort of figure out, what the right answer there is. But absolutely, this job loss point, I think, is just blown out of proportion, and I think it's coloring the debate in a way that could end up holding us back. Before we start to wrap up in a few minutes, I want to come back to, you know, your outlook over the next 5 years, and it is a hard one to predict. But you have more insight than most into what's going on at all of the different model providers. We've seen a lot of competition, both from other proprietary model providers and open source, and seems like Microsoft is training their own model in addition to sort of their support for OpenAI. So, what's your view on how this model ecosystem will evolve?
There's never been a moment like this in tech ever. The fact that you've got tens of billions, I don't know, I haven't seen, I mean, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars between R&D and CapEx that are basically chasing the lowest possible price of creating kind of intellectual, and intelligence for the masses is just incredible. Because if you think about it purely from an economic standpoint, like let's say most of the information that these models are trained on are public data. Let's say most of the algorithms eventually become well understood by multiple players. Let's say most people know how to deploy GPUs inside of data centers. Then like among those things, like there's no particular IP that is sort of sustaining. And so if that's the case, then it really only can become a wedge for something else where there's IP, which means that you extrapolate it out, and we're going to be getting kind of free intelligence, ubiquitously available in 3 to 5 years, including in the enterprise, which is the price of a token is going to be so low that all the hyperscalers are going to want to bring in your workloads for the non-AI use cases. Ironically, yeah, I'm making up a totally fake example. I might spend 2 pennies to process a contract with AI, but 10 or 20 pennies for the compute, the storage, the workflow processing of that process. And so the AI is sort of just the way to get me to use the overall infrastructure that is sort of surrounding that overall system. And that actually is still a very good business model for the hyperscalers. It's not obvious that this was what would have ended up happening. I think you could have easily been like, you know what, there's going to be OpenAI, there's going to be Google, and they're going to like want to collude to keep prices high. And you fast forward, a couple years and or a year and a half, and like you've got a dark horse in Meta, which is like, hey, I'm actually willing to go, totally, bazooka on this thing, which means that I'm going to always ensure the lowest possible price of AI, to the point where it will converge at the price of the GPU. And then that means that now you have to get a response from Google and Microsoft on that front, and you have to then get lowered prices from OpenAI, and this is great for everybody. So I and amazingly, I also think it's still great business for all of those named players. Like OpenAI can still build an incredible business. It just on a per token basis will have to be price competitive with everybody else's.
No, absolutely, and I do think the models, in a sense, are going to be the next, S3 bucket or EC2 instance, in a sense, and you need to have that, but everyone has their own flavor of S3. Everyone has their own flavor of EC2.
100%. And what a bizarre thing for our brains is like, wait a second. So we thought this was a software game, and it's just an infrastructure game, but it's like the infrastructure has software on it. And it's like we're like anybody who's been building technology is like you have to kind of like rethink your views on this stuff, but it should be like it's a hard drive, it's a computer chip. It just happens to be, an AI model. I mean, we would all like it to be as commoditized as possible. We'd like it to be as open as possible. And then ironically, everybody will win more in that case because you'll just get more development, you'll get more utilization of it.
Yeah, the scale will drive the value creation for the hyperscalers, and presumably OpenAI starts to look more and more like a specialized hyperscaler over time, in some sense. And then there's value capture by the application layer, just like the cloud caused an explosion. I mean, of SaaS. Similarly, there'll be a similar explosion of sort of AI-enabled applications, both going after existing software markets, as you said, but opening up a whole range of new markets. I mean, there's, I don't know, 20 million, 25 million people in India alone that work on some sort of KPO, this knowledge process outsourcing, business process outsourcing. You know, all of them deserve to have some sort of AI, and those work jobs will completely change. And there'll be new players in those markets. I mean, I just met a company that's doing an entire healthcare process being reimagined. The whole prior auth process. I didn't know much about prior auth, but prior auth is being reimagined. It's a very complex business process. And as you said earlier, they're not selling software; they're just selling a better prior auth process. And prior auth before used to cost $1 a prior auth. They're like, we're going to come in with 20 cents a prior auth.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's and some like arbitrary advice would be if I were in one of those BPO companies, like I should just again I should make it so you call me for the process and you don't care how I handle it. And it used to be an API to humans, now it's an API to humans plus AI. And where you are in that continuum, all that matters is the SLA that you're delivering to the client. And so I think that's going to make lots of room for lots of different players to emerge in this space.
Just given all the things going on, any parting advice for startup founders?
Don't sleep. There's no time for sleeping right now. We've been doing Box for 18 years or so, and this is the most excited I've ever been in our time. And I've been building software for 25 years in some capacity, and like there's just never been a more exciting period, I think.
It definitely hasn't. I've been doing software for 30 years, and it is a remarkable time. It's the most exciting time in software since 95. I feel like, since the browser, and I was very early in my career, had no appreciation or ability to influence that trend at the time. It is a ridiculously fun time to be in software.
Yeah. So if you're not having fun, I can't help you at this point. And so
But that's what I'm going to remember. No time for sleep.
it's not going to get better than this. So,
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for your time.
all right. Take care, man.
That's our show for now. You can find past episodes and subscribe to future ones wherever you get your podcasts or at foundationcapital.com. And if you like the program, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps others to find the show. B2B as CEO is a production of Foundation Capital, an early-stage venture capital firm with over $3 billion in committed capital and 29 public companies to our name, including Netflix, Lending Club, TubeMogul, and Sunrun. At Foundation Capital, building companies is in our bones. I'm Ashu Garg, a general partner at Foundation Capital. I'm passionate about helping B2B entrepreneurs who are trying to solve hard problems. So if this podcast speaks to you, if you're a technical founder who's interested in scaling an enterprise startup into a massive business and scaling themselves into a true CEO, drop me a line.